Hey friends, thanks for coming and seeing me again. I am so glad I am here with you and you are here with me and I can share a story with you today. So today we're going to be reading this story. It's a really beautiful story. It's called The Girl Who Loved the Wind. So I'm not sure if you've ever read the story Rapunzel, but it is very much like Rapunzel. So basically, her dad is super protective of her. He loves her so much. And sometimes when a parent or a grandparent or guardian loves their child so much, they shield them from everything. So they always want to protect them. So that might be you're not going to your friends, or you're not doing any sleepovers, or you're not going there. And they do that because they really just want to protect you. But sometimes some parents can be very overprotective to the point where a child doesn't really get to experience much. And that's not always the best thing to do. But, your parents raise you the way they raise you, and we have to respect them and love them for that, for taking care of you. But this story is just really fun to see what happens to this child when her dad hears that the wind is coming to her room and speaking to her. He does not like that at all. So let's see what happens, and let's see what she does in this story, The Girl Who Loved the Wind. I hope you enjoy.
The Girl Who Loved the Wind by Jane Yolen. Pictures by Ed Young. For David Stemple and Steve Yolen, Brothers of the Wind. Once, many years ago, in a country far to the east, there lived a wealthy merchant. He was a widower and had an only daughter named Danina. She was dainty and beautiful, and he loved her more than he loved all of his treasures. Because Danina was his only child, the merchant wanted to keep her from anything that might hurt or harm her in any way, and so he decided to shut her away from the world. When Danina was still an infant, her father brought her to a great house which he had built on the shore of the sea. On 3 sides of the house rose 3 huge walls, and on the 4th side was the sea itself. In this lovely, lonely place, Danina grew up knowing everything that was in her father's heart, but nothing of the world. In her garden grew every kind of fair fruit and flower, for so her father willed it. And on her table was every kind of fresh food and fowl, for so her father ordered. In her room were the finest furnishings. Gaily colored books and happy music, light dancing and bright paintings filled her days. Gaily colored books and happy music, light dancing and bright paintings filled her days. And the servants were instructed always to smile, never to say no, and to be cheerful all through the year. So her father wished it, and so it was done. And for many years, nothing sad touched Danina in any way. Yet, one spring day, as Danina stood by her window gazing at the sea, a breeze blew salt across the waves. It whipped her hair about her face. It blew in the corners of her room, and as it moved, it whistled a haunting little tune. Danina had never heard such a thing before. It was sad, but it was beautiful. It intrigued her. It beguiled her. It caused her to sigh and clasp her hands. "Who are you?" asked Danina, and the wind answered, "Who am I? I call myself the wind. I slap at ships and sparrows. I sow through broken windows. I shepherd snow and sandstorm. I am not always kind. Here you merrily rustle the trees and play with the leaves and calm the birds in their nest." "I am not always kind," said the wind again. "Everyone here is always kind. Everyone here is always happy." "Nothing is always," said the wind. "My life is always," said Danina, "always happy." "But life is not always happy," said the wind. "Mine is," said Danina. "How sad," whispered the wind from a corner. "What do you mean?" asked Danina. But the wind only whirled through the window, carrying one of her silken scarves, and before she could speak again, he had blown out to sea. Days went by, happy days, yet sometimes in her room, Danina would try to sing the wind's song. She could not remember the words or recall the tune, but its strangeness haunted her. Finally, one morning, she asked her father, "Why isn't life always happy?" "Life is always happy," replied her father. "That's what I told him," said Danina. "Told who?" asked her father. He was suddenly frightened that someone would take his daughter away. "The wind," said Danina. "The wind does not talk," said her father. "He called himself the wind," she replied, but her father did not understand. And so, when a passing fisherman found Danina's scarf far out at sea and returned it to the merchant's house, he was rewarded with a beating, for the merchant suspected that the fisherman was the one who called himself the wind. Then, one summer day, weeks later, when the sun was reflected into the petals of the flowers, Danina strolled into her garden. Suddenly the wind leaped over the high wall and pushed and pulled at the tops of the trees. He sang a strange song, and Danina clasped her hands and sighed. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Who am I?" said the wind, and he sang, "Who am I? I call myself the wind. I've worked the sails of windmills. I've whirled the sand in deserts. I've wrecked 10,000 galleons. I'm not always kind." "I knew it was you," said Danina, "but no one believed me." And the wind danced around the garden and made the flowers bow. He caressed the birds in the trees and played gently with the feathers on their wings. "You say you're not always kind," said Danina. "You say you have done many unkind things, but all I see is that you are gentle and good." "But not always," reminded the wind. "Nothing is always." "Is it sad then beyond the wall?" "Sometimes sad, sometimes happy," said the wind. "But different each day?" said Danina. "Very different." "How strange," Danina said. "Here things are always the same, always beautiful, happy, good." "How sad," said the wind. "How dull." And he leaped over the wall and blew out into the world. "Come back," shouted Danina, rushing to the wall. But her voice was lost against the stones. Just then her father came into the garden. He saw his daughter standing by the wall and crying to the top. He ran over to her. "Who are you calling? Who has been here?" he demanded. "The wind," said Danina, her eyes bright with memory. "He sang me his song." "The wind does not sing," said her father. "Only men and birds sing." "This was no bird," said the daughter. "Then," thought her father, "it must have been a man," and he resolved to keep Danina from the garden. Locked out of her garden, Danina began to wander up and down the long corridors of the house, and what once had seemed like a palace to her began to feel like a prison. Everything seemed false. The happy smiles of the servants she saw as smiles of pity for her ignorance. The gay dancing seemed to hide broken hearts. The bright paintings hid sad thoughts, and soon Danina found herself thinking of the wind at every moment, humming his song to the walls. His song about the world, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, but always full of change and challenge. Her father, who was not cruel but merely foolish, could not keep her locked up completely. Once a day for an hour, he allowed Danina to walk along the beach. But 3 manservants walked behind, and the merchant himself watched from a covered chair. One chilly day in the fall, when the tops of the waves rolled in white to the shore, Danina strolled on the beach. She pulled her cape around her for warmth, and the 3 maidservants before her and the 3 manservants behind shivered in cold. Her father in his covered chair pulled his blanket to his chin and stared out to sea. He was cold and unhappy, but he was more afraid to leave Danina alone. Suddenly, the wind blew across the caps of the waves, tossing foam into the air. Danina turned to welcome him, stretching out her arms. The cape billowed behind her like the wings of a giant bird. "Who are you?" thundered Danina's father, jumping out of his chair. The wind spun around Danina and sang, "Who am I? I called myself the wind. I am not always happy, and I am not always kind." "Nonsense!" roared Danina's father. "Everyone here is always happy and kind. I shall arrest you for trespassing." and he shouted, "Guards!" But before the guards could come, Danina had spread her cape on the water. Then she stepped onto it, raised one corner, and waved goodbye to her father. The blowing wind filled the cape's corner like the sail of a ship, and before Danina's father had time to call out, before he had time for one word of repentance, she was gone. And the last thing he saw was the billowing cape as Danina and the wind sailed far to the west into the ever-changing world.
Thanks so much for reading this story with us today. If you liked this story and want to hear more, don't forget to hit like, follow, and share. Also, if you're looking for activities to do at home, please visit us at fineanddandykids.com. Thank you.